Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. This is a podcast where we discuss everything cannabis, from medical aspects and legislation to the cultural impacts and everything in between. And today, we're dipping into the intricacies of cannabis terminology. Language shapes our perceptions, influence legislations, and can either unify or divide us. And as the cannabis industry grows and evolves, understanding the power of language surrounding it has never been more critical. We have a very special guest today joining us. He's not just a branding expert with a resume that packs punches with names like American Express, MasterCard, PepsiCo, Microsoft. He's a pioneer in the cannabis branding and marketing industry. After vaulting into the cannabis space in 2012, he went on to become a best-selling author with his groundbreaking work, Branding But, the Commercialization of Cannabis. And he's just released his latest masterpiece, Cannabis versus Marijuana, Language, Landscape, and Context. Dick Paleschuck, thank you so much and welcome to this edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel.
Hi, Montel. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, sir. Look, your background is really fascinating, and you've worked with some of the biggest brands in the world and then transitioned into cannabis. How did you find yourself in this industry? And what made you decide to switch to cannabis?
Well, I've always been around cannabis. As a professional skateboarder in my early days, it was part of my lifestyle. But I saw the struggles here in Washington State. I live in Seattle, and saw the the push and pull between medical and recreational, or what I call adult use, and really just saw the opportunity when the law passed, the I-502 law passed here in 2012. I gave notice at Microsoft and I decided to get into the industry. I saw all my friends here in Washington State and Seattle specifically, leaving Amazon, leaving Microsoft, leaving Starbucks, etc., to get into the industry. And I thought there was an opportunity for me to do that as well.
Wow. And now, you give me a little brief note about your I can assume, being a skateboarder, you were a consumer on your own. When did you start, and how long were you consuming? And did you ever do any other advocacy even while you were working on Microsoft?
Yeah, my consumption started very late in life. Even though I was skateboarding, I considered myself more of an athlete. My brother was arrested for one joint in the 70s. That was the first time I ever saw my father cry. So I was very much affected by the illegality of cannabis, and couldn't really understand why it was such a big deal as it was. Essentially it's a plant. And while it can be abused, there's certainly medicinal and therapeutic qualities to it. So to answer your second question in terms of, had I advocated for it while I was still working, in some ways I have, but certainly not as strong as I do now. Once I left the corporate world and got into the cannabis industry, that's when I really, came out of the closet, if you will, and stepped up my game and really started to add value to the industry. I think 12 years ago, the industry was a very different place. And I was one of the first with a corporate background to come in to help brands actually brand themselves in ways that most consumer packaged goods brand. And the truth is, we are all consumers. We consume every day. We make choices about what we purchase and how we consume products. And I knew that from my previous years in corporate. And what I was able to do was really ascertain a couple of things. One, working at American Express and MasterCard, I often thought, what does credit card marketing have to do with cannabis? But the truth is, it actually has a lot to do with it. And that is trust marketing, right? American Express and MasterCard and Visa, they're all about trust. It's all about use our credit card. We'll always serve you, the transaction will always go through. Yes, we have your financial information. You can trust us with it. And so trust marketing was always a big play in my world, while I was in the credit card industry. And then when I moved over to Mountain Dew and then to Xbox, that was really about lifestyle, right? Lifestyle marketing. And it was all about what's cool and what's happening and how does a brand fit into your lifestyle. And when I finally got into cannabis, I realized, hey, wait a second. Cannabis is really about trust marketing. Can you trust this product? Are there pesticides in this product? Is this a consistent product? And then lifestyle marketing as well. Is it cool? Is it relevant? How does it fit into my lifestyle? And so those two things, trust marketing and lifestyle marketing, were really what I think I I found as my calling to come into the industry and to try to help the industry along with that.
I mean, you literally wrote the book of cannabis branding with Branding Bud before you jumped into your new book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the first venture?
Well, Branding Bud really came about as I saw the evolution of brands changing. When I first got into the industry, it was all about cultivators and cultivator brands and farm based brands. And over the course of time, I started to realize, especially when edibles and beverages came into play, it was really more about consumer product good marketing and branding. And so, um, the one thing I always noticed in the early days, and it still happens today quite a bit, is you'll have a cultivator who says, my weed is the best weed. And, they're all about that. But they're not really about who is this for? How does this fit into their lifestyle? Do they consume discreetly or indiscreetly? Do they, I always talk about an additive or subtractive perspective, meaning, are they using it to enhance something they're doing? Or is a cannabis consumer about to paint, about to go on a hike, perhaps play music or have sex? Are they using it to enhance an experience? Or there's the subtractive consumer, they're using it to basically alleviate pain or to go to sleep, etc. And the mindsets and the need states that these different consumers have is very important, especially when purchasing a brand and how they would leverage it into their lifestyle. So what I saw very quickly was that all the cultivators were saying their product was the best, and that anytime anybody would ask these producers who their clients were, they would say everybody. And I would basically say, well, it's not. Let's just start off at 21 plus. But then there's different need states, there's different mindsets, there's different demographics and psychographics and ethnographics that we really need to think about. And so the book was really about who is your customer? And if you don't know who your customer is, who would you like it to be and who you'd like to appeal to? And then really, again, what are their need states? What is it that they're looking to really benefit from, consuming cannabis? And then really, how do we fit that brand into their life? And so the brand talks about the 14 cannabis brand archetypes. The archetypes are not mutually exclusive, and I'll just rattle off a few. There's a celebrity brand, there's a novelty brand, there's a cultivator brand, there's gender-based brands, there's charity-based brands. So let's just harp on that for one moment. Charity-based brands, there's Justice Joints, and there's 40 Tons, and there's Evidence, and there's all these brands that exist that are giving a certain portion of their proceeds. So there is the overlay of a charity brand to help people either movements for expungement or some of the other things that are taking place in the industry. So as consumers, there are certain things that are more important to us. And as consumers, we look for those things in the brands we purchase. And if I could go off on a slight tangent, branding has changed from, let's say, the 50s to where we are today. In the 50s and 60s, brands were about efficiency. Think sliced bread, think sliced cheese, think miles per gallon. As we got more into the 70s and 80s, it was more about how brands made us feel. Think miles per hour instead of miles per gallon, or how, the wind blew through our hair as we were driving our convertible. Then as we started to get into the 80s, to the 90s and closer to the 2000s, brands were really about inclusion and exclusion. That's when logo slaps came about. That's when Supreme came on your t-shirt. That's when brands started to really, when people started to use brands to either include themselves or exclude themselves from certain groups. And now where we are today is We buy brands because we believe in their message. We believe in what they're telling us. Think Patagonia, or think maybe Tesla if you're into electric vehicles, or Seventh Generation, which is a laundry detergent. Um, so now we're really looking at brands differently, and we purchase brands differently. And that evolution and that arc has changed over the years, over the decades. And cannabis is no different.
And I mean, when you look at the industry right now, what do you come away with? What do you think? I mean, are we hitting the mark the right way, or are we going about it the wrong way?
Well, I would say we've moved far from green pot leaves, and puns, relative to pot or to marijuana, or that sort of branding. We've come a long way from that. Recently, somebody wanted me to consult on a brand which they were so excited about, which was called 421. Better late than never. Um, my comment was that makes a great T-shirt, but not necessarily a great brand. Um, I
But
think we.
I can think about it, and I believe me, I don't say this in any way, shape, or form as an aspersion, because clearly the brand is working. But I mean, here's Mike Tyson. He puts out a brand with a chunk of an ear out of it. It's an ear with a piece of an ear out of it. Sold $150 million worth of product to date. I mean, cannabis biting somebody's ear, fighter. Don't get it.
I don't get it either, and there's very few sore points I have in the industry, and Mike Tyson happens to be one of them. While I do believe, and my feelings about this has changed over time, you know, initially I was not a fan of celebrity brands. But what I thought, and it's clear that many celebrities are in it to make money and not really for the cause. But that said, celebrities in the industry help normalize it, I believe, and my feelings have changed on that. Personally, I don't get Mike Tyson. I don't get Mike Tyson in the industry. I don't think um, the ear with the chunk out of it is really the right approach. I actually just don't really stand for what he stands for, and I hate to say it this way, but he's a wife beater, and I could run down the list of many other things that he's done in his past. And sure, I believe in forgiveness, but he hasn't really turned the corner, or at least the way I see it. You know, I don't think Evander Holyfield is getting a piece of,
He is getting a piece of it. I just found this out yesterday. Evander Holyfield does get a piece out of that ear
and
thing. He had to be included in it. Yep.
he did, and that was after the fact. It wasn't like Mike Tyson actually went to Evander Holyfield and had a conversation.
I think when the brand was launched, you might have to dig into this because I've not done that legally to dig into it. But I think he had to have his permission when the brand was even launched, when the brand was launched, or he was in fear of being sued. So therefore, there is a partnership. Evander Holyfield makes money off of that brand.
Right, and to my knowledge, that took place after the fact because
Okay.
people called him out on it. But nonetheless, I mean, personally, yes, the product sold, and millions were made.
Still selling.
I don't think that's a product that normalizes the plant and brings acceptance to the industry in the way that it should be. And hey, this is just one man's opinion, right?
Sure, sure.
Apparently, other people feel differently about it.
But recently, the DEA just put out a memo saying that they are going to, in the next few months, we don't know when that could be. It could be 1 month, 6 months, 8 months. It could be a year. The DEA is going to go ahead and reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. And I was really taken aback by some of the reporting that we see at the national level when they kept using the term pot. Yesterday, it just really pissed me off when I saw it over and over and over again. I have been a person who has literally attempted to change the conversation about everything from what we call rec or adult use in medical, and also change the conversation when it comes to pot, cannabis, marijuana. I've been doing this for over 10 years now, trying to get the conversation changed in the right direction. especially when it comes to this just going back to pot and I was watching this on a reputable news channel, and I was like, really? So this is how you're going to take your shot? I mean, we still have those that are the haters who are going to continue to hate, and and try to figure out ways to denigrate the plant. I mean, you don't hear them uh, calling tamoxifen by the plant name. You don't hear them calling aspirin willow. So it just throws me that as much as we hope that there's normalization coming, when I've said this over and over again on this podcast, it's we got a lot of old fuckers got to die before this whole thing changes. I mean, we just got people who are just deeply entrenched and are never going to change. But I mean, and when it comes to the whole idea of adult use versus medical use, I would happen to say, and I think it should be said more. Anybody who comes to cannabis over any other euphoria-inducing product, I think, comes for a medical reason, they want to admit it or not. So it all is medical to me. Whether you call it an adult use state or a rec state, no, it's a medical state because the people who are actually consuming the product have come to the table because you said it earlier. They want to sleep better. They want to cut their anxiety when they get home from work. They want to relax. They want all those things are medical reasons to me. That's not an adult use reason for me. I mean, so what do you think about that? Sorry.
Well, there's a whole bunch of things I
Yeah, I
think
just went a whole way. Sorry.
about. Yeah, recently I've seen the coverage as well, and it was very disappointing to see many of the major, channels talking about pot, talking about marijuana, and not using the term cannabis. That was super disappointing. Um, I pay attention to words. My latest book is all about words, and words can be used in two ways. It's a double-edged sword. Words can basically create communities and foster communities. I learned that as a skateboarder. I learned that in the cannabis industry, we use certain words, but words also marginalize people as well, and keep people from the mainstream, or really stereotype people. And so when I hear words on mainstream media like pot or like marijuana, it's very disappointing to me to see to see words being used which have connotations, which we should be over by now.
And we do so deliberately. I think that's what some people don't quite put one and one together to come up with two. They somehow think, oh, they just are using the words. They don't really think about it. No, I really truly believe that there's a thought behind it. The reason why a anchor of a major news station would say pot, they're doing so in a way to basically put it down. And the fact that we allow for that in this day and age, it's say, well, that's how we are as a society. And let's go on to your book. I mean, it's perfect transition. I mean, cannabis versus marijuana, language, landscape, and context. And again, if people wanted to find out more about it, where would they go website wise?
They could go to Amazon. That's probably the best place to go check it out.
And your motivation behind writing the book at the time that you decided that's going to be number two, why did you say that? Why did you pick that as number two?
Well, I was at an event in Olympia, Washington, the capital of Washington State, and basically it was on changing the word in packaging, the word marijuana to cannabis. And as we were talking about this and debating it, at the end of this event, a politician came up to me and said, thank you for joining us and thank you for participating. But I'm curious, you don't use marijuana, do you? Because you don't look like you use marijuana. And I said, no, I don't use marijuana. I consume cannabis. And his head swiveled around on his shoulders and he said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, to consume something is more thoughtful than to use something. If you use something, especially when it comes to substances, and we're having a conversation about drugs, typically use slides right into abuse. And then before you know it, we're having the gateway drug conversation. And so I explained to him that cannabis is more scientific, and that as we move forward, we need to be more thoughtful and scientific about the words we use. But further, using the word consume, overuse, is important because as consumers, as I said earlier, we make consumption decisions, on a daily basis, and we're thoughtful about it, we're practical about it, we think about price, we think about value, we think about ingredients, we think about all these things when we consume. Yet when we use, none of that thought really flows into that word. So for me, the words are really important, and I started to really think about what other words are being used that are just either misappropriated, misused, or quite frankly, just wrong. And so, I think it's pretty obvious, the baggage that the word marijuana has. I think it's important that we move toward the scientific word. Or botanist or horticultural words that make sense. So cannabis makes sense. I went through use versus consume, adult use versus recreational. I think is really important. I have a 14-year-old son, and when he gets out of school, he recreates. And I certainly hope he's not consuming cannabis. So adult use is more thoughtful. Again, it's of a certain age. There's thought behind it. There's intent behind it, and I think it makes more sense because again, recreational is what we do in our spare time, but it's also what kids do. We think of parks and recreation. We think of all these other things. So it's just not really on point. And you had touched upon something earlier when you used the word medical. I have a chapter in the book where it questions, is it medical, is it medicinal, or is it therapeutic? And so I would argue the case, and at least the way I see it, is and before I even get into this, I want to call out that I recognize so many people have fought for medical marijuana, and I don't want to take anything away from what they've done, but we still have a long way to go. And so by calling it medical marijuana, I feel we take a lot of the wind out of our sails. So for example, I don't call it medical. Why? Because a doctor can't prescribe it, because the
As
dosing.
of yet, as of yet, but
That's
if the
right.
DEA gets their way, then doctors will have to prescribe it, and then that
True.
opens up a whole nother quagmire. But go right ahead, yes, sir.
True. So as of yet, we're still not there, and that's why I don't call it medical. But doctors can't prescribe it. The research, to the degree that has been done on other, let's say medicines or substances, still has a long way to go.
Well,
Dosing.
and this is what I'm not just differing with you for argument's sake, but I would say, that's part of the problem when it comes to this particular product. I'll call it product in a world. There are more peer-reviewed, published documents on cannabis around the world than there is on any other drug in the marketplace. And just the fact there are over 3,500 in the last 4 years in a row, 3,500 peer-reviewed, published documents since 2021, every single year. Over 35,000 documents worldwide. There is not another drug in the marketplace anywhere, from chemotherapy to amoxicillin to Viagra to nothing comes close to the number of peer-reviewed studied or peer-reviewed published documents. So therefore, this is a plant and is a could be, if you don't want to use the word medicine or medicinal. Back when you first started, you said three. You said medicine. What did you say? Medicine.
Right. So
Medicinal.
I don't think it's medical. Then medicinal, which is getting closer, and therapeutic was the third word I used.
Okay, and then I would venture to say, from my perspective, I think it's all three, because there is medical science coming out of Israel and other places in this world that shows that THC and other minor cannabinoids have a medical effect on the mitochondria of our cells. We have a system in our bodies that is called the endocannabinoid system. That is a system that actually makes endocannabinoids, cannabinoids that we make within our cells. One is called anandamide, the other is called 2-AG. Those two chemicals, that is a medical term.
And
We do know that for an anandamide deficiency, we're starting to see several different things that are taking place that we call disease that might just be an anandamide deficiency.
right,
Yes, go ahead. So,
I'm sorry. I don't disagree with you at all. I guess so. I feel like you're talking more about the benefits. I'm talking more about an overall system. So, for example, doctors can prescribe it. Dosing is, all over the map in terms of what a serving size is. And the truth is, pharmacies don't deliver it, and most importantly, insurance doesn't cover it. So when I look at it from a systemic perspective, that's what I'm calling out. I totally agree with you that there are medical benefits to cannabis. We are totally on the same page. Um,
and we're going to see. I mean, I think as we now decide, because again, America, often likes to tout itself as the nation that leads, but we are really the nation that follows, and we're doing nothing more than following a system that's already been put in place. If you go to Israel right now, a doctor can prescribe a particular dosage of cannabis for you for varied maladies. They actually have gotten it down to a point where there's certain number of milligrams, and they have even in a smokable way and ingestible way, they are prescribing it in Israel right now. And several other countries are trying to follow suit. So America will be the one that will follow suit because that's really, and in, I don't know if you know, in Georgia, part of the Georgia state law was to allow pharmacies to actually dispense cannabis, real, legitimate, independent pharmacies, not multi-state players. So now the DEA wrote them a cease and desist letter for a minute, but they're going to have to take that back because they changed it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. You're going to find that I honestly believe at the end of the day, this is a hoodwink that this industry is so stupid that we haven't been able to catch on to. Who owns the patent for minor cannabinoids? The U.S. government. Patent number 22603-507 that they've had since the year 2002. The U.S. government gave themselves a patent. So therefore, if this becomes a Schedule 3 drug, all you have to do, and that patent has been extended multiple times. So if this goes all the way through to fruition, there could be a legal battle in courts for the federal government to step in and say any dispensary in America selling any product that has CBD or any other minor cannabinoid in it, you need to cease and desist immediately because it's under the control of us. And what do you do then? There's nothing you can do. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I totally agree with you. So it's just coming back full circle. It's I look at the system and I say cannabis is not medical based on the system that we currently have. Now, is it medicinal? Yes. Are there medicinal benefits? Absolutely. Are there therapeutic benefits? Absolutely. So and I feel by calling it medical marijuana, again, I'm not a fan of the word marijuana. I think the double M sort of rolls off our tongues easier. But I think we, in some ways, do ourselves a disservice because we're not quite there yet. We still have to go, the distance. And I also, just to add to that, dosing is so important, and it's not only dosing, but it's form factor, right? So if you think about, are you ingesting, are you inhaling, what form factor? Are you smoking flower? Are you drinking something? Are you eating something? Then we get into bioavailability, and then we get into uptake, and we get into all these other things that are important when it comes to dosing. And so I still think work needs to be done, and then other words that are in the book, for example, strain. Do you know strain has everything to do with viruses and bacteria and nothing to do with horticulture or botany? So the real word is cultivar. Um, and what's really interesting, and just to even break that down, variety is the evolution of plants within nature. And cultivar is cultivated variety, which is the man made evolution of plants.
Which
And
is everything in the last 50 years, 60 years.
exactly. So, one, we should be using the right terms. And I feel we should be using the right terms because as cannabis legalization globalizes, as we speak to more policymakers and politicians and scientists and researchers, we need to start using the real language, the language of science and the language of folks that will be, you know, normalizing the plant eventually, I hope. But, you know, I come back to that first politician that I spoke to when he said, "You don't use marijuana, do you?" Um, and I started to think about language, and I started to think about, you know, very simple concepts. Like, for example, I spent a year in France when I was in college. And so many Americans, tourists, would come through whatever, the Champs Elysees, and ask for directions of a French person. And they just ask in English. And the French person would get upset and either say they don't speak English in French, or the American person would say it louder. And I always thought to myself, wow, if I really wanted to communicate with somebody, shouldn't I be communicating in their language? Even if at the very least it's like, excuse me, I don't speak French. Do you speak English? You know, it's just that introduction. It's just that courtesy. It's just the way to build the bridge to communicate. And so, what I've noticed in the cannabis industry is that we continue to use language amongst ourselves, which, even though that creates community, it also creates stereotypes. And the fostering of those stereotypes are done by the folks that marginalize us, like we spoke about earlier on broadcast TV. So my thought behind the book is, how do we start to address some of the issues that we've been fighting for, but using their language instead of ours, understanding that we need to build bridges with people. And how do we go about that? And so, you know, one example or analogy might be, if we were to speak about gun control, immediately, just those two words turn off anybody that's pro Second Amendment, you know, when it comes to that. However, if we started a conversation with responsible gun ownership, they're at least still with us. We haven't lost them right away. And I sort of use this analogy when I think about, how do we come to researchers, scientists, policymakers, politicians. And in today's world, and I'm not quite sure if it's politics or if it's, you know, echo chambers on social media, but, you know, we're so quick to dig into to a perspective, and anybody that doesn't believe that perspective is, you know, is nonsense, or full of crap. And I think it's just so important for us to be a little more curious, be a little more understanding of other people's perspectives, ask them how they came to that perspective, ask them why they use certain words, ask them if they understand how loaded certain words are. So that's really what the book is about, you know, coming all the way around on the question of why the book. I think we need to have smart conversation, or smarter conversations. And, you know, if I had one wish in today's world, it would be that people were a little more curious, that people would ask more questions, that people would take a moment to maybe learn the facts, or even listen to opposing facts, you know, to sort of come to a place where maybe they're just a little more well balanced in their approach to what they believe.
Well, you know, and I agree, expect, but I think one of the groups that does us the greatest disservice is our own industry ourselves. I mean, you know, we have so many people in this industry who literally, again, from, you know, the ear with a chunk missing on it, or you know, the constant rewriting of, you know, it's like you constantly see these shows that talk about our industry, and it's one that, you know, is filled with a bunch of stoners who couldn't seem to put their socks on in the morning. I don't understand why we as an industry, there's so much money. I think back in 2021, this industry made $25 billion worth of 25 billion, sold $25 billion worth of legal cannabis, sold about $75 billion worth of gray and black market cannabis. There's enough money in this industry to start to tell our own story the way we want to tell it, if we decided that we didn't want to buy a boat first. You know what I'm saying?
You are speaking my language, Montel. You know, I I have a lot of difficulty with the industry. I think the industry is its own worst enemy, quite frankly.
I agree with you 100%.
And it takes more people that have an understanding and a respect for the culture, but also understand that in order to move things forward, um, we need to respect our culture, but we need to normalize the plant. And if we're going to normalize the plant, we need to be responsible citizens, and probably more importantly, be viewed as responsible citizens, not as stoners.
And we do that by telling some truths. There's one thing about this industry that really just blows my mind is that we never tell the truth. And what I mean by that is the fact that let's go back to the fact that this country was built on hemp. It wasn't built on tobacco and cotton. The country was built on hemp. Everything about this country was built on hemp. Everything from the fact that we used to eat porridges made of hemp seed, the fact that we used to put hemp seed on ships traveling the world. All intercontinental commerce was driven through hemp because that's what they ate. It didn't rot on board the ship. The reason why they had sails, the reason why they had ropes, the reason why they had canvases, the reason why they had sheets. The entire Revolutionary Army was clothed in hemp. The only common denominator between the North and the South is that they both had uniforms that were made of hemp. If we look at after the Civil War, I mean, there were more tinctures and more medicinal potions that were formulated around cannabis than any other product in the market. So yes, there was opioids. Yes, there were other. You could find opium dens in the 1890s, but you found a lot more people consuming cannabis, and we just never tell the truth about this. The fact that during World War II, the president of the United States signed a bill forcing farmers to grow hemp because we were running out of rope. Come on, I mean, there's so many things that we should tell the truth about that we don't tell the truth about. And it's only because there's too many people more interested in buying that next Ferrari or that next Lamborghini rather than understanding that it's going to take us all to raise the level of conversation among everyone.
That's right. And that was brilliant, by the way. The thing that always escapes people, and I'm not a believer in conspiracies. I don't think people are smart enough to create conspiracies, generally speaking. But the war between paper or wood pulp and hemp
Without a
is
doubt.
that's right, is really the critical point. And so it
And
all comes.
also textiles were coming in. So you had Charles DuPont and you had William Randolph Hearst funding Anslinger and getting him to vilify a product that was interfering with their future business intent. And, we just fell along with that because we were at a time. It's one thing about Americans that is more true than we ever will admit to. We are the most gullible, hook, line, and sinker idiots on this planet. You put it out there and you say it loud enough, and you take a look at what's going on right now in our, political discourse. You put out hate and discontent, you say it loud enough, people start to believe it.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I think that's really where, Harry Anslinger, Hearst, the paper barons versus the hemp farmers, that was really the turning point. And I actually addressed that in both books, early on in the book where I talk about that. And how I believe it was Hearst's niece was married to Harry Anslinger, or a relative, but there was a connection. And yeah, that's when cannabis became marijuana, and that's when marijuana was frowned upon because it was connected to Mexican migrants, African American jazz musicians, and anybody that was not seen as white and wholesome, quite frankly.
And let's just go through it. I mean, Anslinger just lost his job, being the head of alcohol prohibition. So he needed something to have a job in. So he decided, let me just jump on this bandwagon. This may help. And he was getting a good paycheck from those who were supporting him to vilify something that never needed to be vilified. I just don't understand how the nation became so gullible that they believed it, even at the same time they were still consuming it, because we understand it during the 20s, 30s, and 40s and early 50s, cannabis was being consumed by a lot of white Americans, more white Americans than there were black Americans. We had some of the biggest sales of cannabis in Kentucky and Tennessee. Most people think that cannabis came out of, the Humboldt County, the Northern California regions. No, no, no. We were selling more. The biggest marijuana bust in this country took place in Kentucky. People don't even stop to understand that. Kentucky, what are you talking about, Montel? Yes, Kentucky. They had something down there that was called the Cornbread Mafia. These are the guys who are literally growing and spreading it all over the nation, claiming it was coming across the border from Mexico, but it was coming from Tennessee. So it really, or from Kentucky. So and why would Kentucky have a senator who was the person who pushed for the hemp bill more than anybody else? Because he recognized how many farmers down there in Kentucky area were complaining about the fact, look, you guys are just completely killing our revenue. At least give us hemp, and they gave them hemp. And now that's as big an issue as cannabis was from day one. So, I mean, I think it's more education. Education is what should be embraced, especially now. I mean, as we move forward and you see how disjointed and how this industry is just, to me, is falling apart.
Yeah, I think, in many ways I agree with you. In many ways, I feel that we had our opportunity and we didn't really step up. I know there's lots of folks right now, in particular, some are pro the rescheduling, some are anti rescheduling. Many are afraid that big pharma is going to come in and take over. And
I,
I feel, as much as I'm not a fan of big pharma at all, there's a part of me which feels that if that's what it takes to normalize the plant, then maybe that's what it takes. But
but my fear with that is, and I agree with you in some ways, but my fear is that how the hell am I going to try? If you said, for the last 20 years in a row, aspirin doesn't work. Aspirin doesn't work. Aspirin doesn't work. Aspirin doesn't work. And now, because you want to make a buck, you're going to tell me I'm going to make an aspirin that does work? I'm not believing you. I don't believe you. I don't believe you have the right intent. I think your intent is nefarious and it's only to make money. And so for the pharmaceutical industry right now to say, okay, well, now that they made it legal, we're going to embrace it. No, they are going to go after doing what they tried to go after doing in the 60s and the 70s. And that was to synthesize something. And, not all medications have to be synthesized. Not all medications have to be made duplicate, bioduplications. Why can't we use what nature gave us? If you believe in science and you believe in the truth of who we claim to be the smartest man on the planet, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So therefore, on this earth, cannabis was put here for a reason. And it probably was put here for a reason to be used against some of the other things that it actually is now starting to prove its efficaciousness with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always think about cannabinoids. I think about terpenes. I think about how terpenes exist in so many other things. And I think in some ways, I think some of the things we need, for example, is more simplified explanations of things. And while I hate to say we need to dumb things down, we need, in some ways, to do that. And I think one example is, instead of talking about indica or sativa, which is another chapter in my book, I think one of the things we need to talk about is cannabinoids and terpenes. And if we just limit this conversation for a minute to terpenes, everybody knows there are existing models already. One called aromatherapy, right? Everybody knows that lavender relaxes me. Oh, and citrus and pine excite me. And if you start to think about, what would typically be called indica or sativa, indica usually has more linalool in it. Linalool is a terpene which is found in chamomile and lavender. Therefore, it's more relaxing. On the other side of the spectrum, if you look at what would typically be called sativa, you'd find more pinene or more limonene. Again, more citrus and pine, which is uplifting. And so I think if we can create conversations that are based on models that people already understand and already believe in, then the plant becomes more simplified in terms of how we understand it and how it could benefit us. Um,
Yeah,
but
I'm with you 100%. I think this entire conversation about sativa indica should have been thrown out the window 15 years ago when we started at bastardizing the plants so much that everything for sale in North America is a hybrid of some sort.
yes,
It's been a crossbreed of some sort that man created. And we're going back to, the idea of having, strains versus cultivars. Well, the cultivars now have got a point where, I don't think if science is supposedly true, if you go way, way, way back a couple thousand years, there were probably only about 5 different variations of that original cannabis sativa plant. There was probably 5 to 7. I've heard 7. So if there were 7, and over the course of time, now 4 or 5,000 years, they have been crossbred so much that the original one of what would have been a sativa and one that would have been an indica don't really exist.
that's right. That's right. And so now sativa and indica has really more or less has fallen into like sativas, sedative, uplifting, and indicas are more sedative, which is oversimplified.
Yes.
But and then even further, in today's industry, we'll see edibles which are called sativas or sativa or indica, and the truth is once we start extracting THC from the plant, the first thing to burn off are the terps. Now
Correct.
you can reintroduce terps, whether they're artificial or whether they're cannabis derived, whether they're chemical, or you could just basically call out like this THC was extracted from an indica cultivar. But the truth is, when we get to that place, there isn't even an indica or sativa version of a gummy, if you will. So we've confused things pretty well, and I think we've done a great job at confusing people. And I just wish there were a few truths that we could hold on to and deliver them in a way that people are more likely to believe them.
Well, with your book, you are trying to do that right now, and I appreciate and I really applaud you for what you're doing. Give out the title of the book one more time.
The book is called Cannabis versus Marijuana: Language, Landscape, and Context.
We barely scratched the surface, David. I don't know if you know, but I had so many more questions for you. I'd love to have you back. Would you come back?
Absolutely. I'd love to come back.
Sure, absolutely. And I think it's these kinds of conversations that people need to hear more in this industry than, the conversations that in some ways we get from a lot of other places. And I'm not knocking anybody else's podcast, but, it's like we really have got to stop with some of the silly and start doing exactly the right thing. And that's educating people and giving them the tools to have real, good, solid, informative conversations. I thank you so much for being a part of the show today. Again, I'm so sorry it went like that. I mean, I look at my clock and I know we almost had you for an hour, and I know you got to go. So why don't we table for now and say you're definitely coming back? Give out a website where people can go and get you, find you.
Yeah, you can find me on brandingbud.com. That's my website. I can be reached at david@brandingbud.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Okay, for sure. We will reach out to you, sir. Thank you so much again for being a part of the show. And thank all of you for tuning in. As always, as I try to bring you as much information as I can to help you make good quality decisions for you and your family as you navigate this really daunting space called cannabis. Stay informed. Make sure you continue to read. This is a book that you've got to go. I think this is a must reading for all of us in the cannabis industry. And again, David, I say thank you so much for joining us today. Incredible work in the space. Your books are not just educational, they call to action for everyone to get involved and who are interested in cannabis. And so for you, the listeners, get involved, stay frosty, stay informed, and let's stay blunt, okay? See you on the next one. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments.